Michael Jackson was in the middle of Billie Jean at Wembley Stadium when a man suddenly jumped over the security barrier and ran onto the stage. 65,000 fans gasped in shock as security guards immediately sprinted toward the intruder from all directions. But before anyone could reach him, Michael Jackson did something that froze everyone in place. He screamed into his microphone, "Stop! Don't touch him!" Then Michael dropped the microphone, and with tears already streaming down his face, he ran toward the man and threw his arms around him. It was July 16th, 1988, the final night of Michael Jackson's Bad World Tour European leg at Wembley Stadium in London. The show had been absolutely electric, with Michael performing at the peak of his powers. He'd already brought the crowd to their feet with Smooth Criminal, Beat It, and The Way You Make Me Feel. Now, midway through his signature song Billie Jean, everything stopped because of a man nobody in the stadium recognized except Michael Jackson. The man who had jumped onto the stage was 63 years old, thin and frail looking, wearing clothes that had clearly seen better days. His face was weathered, his hair completely gray, and he moved with a slight limp. To the security guards, he looked like exactly what they were trained to stop. A dangerous intruder, possibly mentally unstable, definitely a threat to the biggest star on the planet. But to Michael Jackson, this man was something else entirely. He was James Earl Crawford, and he was the reason Michael Jackson knew how to dance. The story of James Earl Crawford and Michael Jackson began 23 years earlier, in 1965, in Gary, Indiana. Michael was 7 years old, the youngest member of the Jackson Five, and his father Joseph was pushing all five boys relentlessly to perfect their act. Joseph knew his sons had talent, but he also knew that talent without discipline meant nothing. He needed someone to teach them choreography, stage presence, and the kind of showmanship that would set them apart from every other group trying to make it in the music business. Joseph couldn't afford professional choreographers. The family was barely surviving financially, living in a tiny house on Jackson Street with 9 people sharing 3 bedrooms. But Joseph heard about a man in Gary who had once been a professional dancer in Chicago before an injury ended his career. A black man in his early 40s who worked at the steel mill during the day and taught neighborhood kids to dance in his garage at night, not for money, but because he loved it. James Earl Crawford had been a tap dancer in Chicago's South Side clubs during the 1940s and early 1950s. He performed with some of the greatest black entertainers of that era, learning from masters, developing a style that blended tap, jazz, and what would later be called street dance. He'd been on his way to real success when a drunk driver hit him while he was crossing the street in 1954, shattering his left leg and ending his professional dancing career at age 29. James had moved to Gary, Indiana in 1956, taking a job at the steel mill to support his wife and young daughter. He thought his dancing days were over, but he couldn't stop moving, couldn't stop hearing rhythm in everything, couldn't stop seeing choreography in his mind. So he started teaching neighborhood kids in his garage, sharing everything he'd learned, keeping the art form alive through a new generation even though his own performing days were finished. When Joseph Jackson showed up at James Crawford's garage in February 1965 with 5 boys, ranging in age from 7 to 13, James took one look at little Michael and saw something that made his heart skip. This wasn't just talent. This was something rare, something special. The 7-year-old boy moved with a natural grace that couldn't be taught, but James recognized immediately that Michael's raw talent needed to be shaped, refined, and disciplined. James agreed to teach the Jackson Five, not for money, because Joseph couldn't pay, but for the joy of working with real talent. For the next 2 years, from 1965 to 1967, James Crawford spent 3 evenings a week in his garage, teaching the Jackson boys everything he knew. He taught them timing, precision, how to move as a unit while each maintaining individual expression. He taught them stage presence, how to command attention, how to make every gesture meaningful. But with Michael, James did something different. He recognized that this child had the potential to be more than just a good dancer. Michael could be transcendent. So James gave Michael extra lessons, staying late after the other boys left, teaching him techniques that went beyond basic choreography. James taught Michael how to isolate body parts, creating the illusion of impossible movement. He taught him how to use stillness as powerfully as motion. He taught him the foundational moves that Michael would later develop into his signature style. The moonwalk, though Michael would make it famous decades later, had roots in moves James Crawford taught him in that garage in Gary, Indiana. The glide, the precision, the illusion of defying gravity, all of it came from techniques James had learned from old vaudeville performers and jazz dancers in Chicago. James couldn't perform these moves anymore because of his injured leg, but he could teach them, demonstrate them slowly, and watch with pride as 7-year-old Michael absorbed everything and then added his own genius to it. James never asked for anything in return. He never asked for credit or recognition or money. He taught the Jackson boys because he loved dance and because he saw in them, especially in Michael, a chance for his art to live beyond his own broken body. In 1967, when the Jackson 5 got their first real break and started performing regularly outside of Gary, Joseph told James that they couldn't afford to keep taking lessons. James had simply smiled and said, "You don't owe me anything. Just promise me you'll keep dancing. Promise me you'll show the world what black artists can do." Michael, who was 9 years old at the time, had hugged James tightly and said, "I promise I'll make you proud. I promise I'll never forget what you taught me." Those were the last words Michael Jackson ever spoke to James Earl Crawford. The Jackson 5 left Gary shortly after, moving to California when they signed with Motown. Michael's life became a whirlwind of recording sessions, tours, television appearances, and eventually global superstardom. The shy 9-year-old boy from Gary, Indiana, became the king of pop, the most famous entertainer on the planet. And James Crawford went back to his life at the steel mill. He watched Michael's career from a distance, seeing the moves he'd taught evolve into something bigger, more polished, more extraordinary than he'd ever imagined. He saw the moonwalk debut on Motown 25 in 1983 and recognized the foundation he'd laid 20 years earlier in his garage. He saw Michael perform at the Grammy Awards, on world tours, in music videos that changed the industry forever. James never told anyone about his connection to Michael Jackson. He didn't want recognition or credit. He just felt grateful that he'd played a small part in something beautiful. But life hadn't been kind to James Crawford. His wife had died in 1976. His daughter had moved to New York, and they'd lost touch. He'd worked at the steel mill until it closed in 1985, putting him out of work at age 60. His pension barely covered rent and food. By 1988, James was living in a small apartment in South London, having moved there to be near his sister after he could no longer afford his place in Gary. He was sick, though he didn't know it yet. The constant exposure to chemicals at the steel mill had damaged his lungs, and he had maybe 2 years left to live. James had seen advertisements for Michael Jackson's Wembley Stadium concerts, and something in him ached. He wanted to see his student perform one last time. He wanted to see what the 7-year-old boy he'd taught in his garage had become. But tickets were impossible to get and absurdly expensive. James couldn't afford them on his meager pension. So he did something desperate. On July 16th, 1988, James took the train to Wembley Stadium, walked up to the venue, and waited near the entrance. He didn't have a plan exactly. He just knew he needed to see Michael one last time. As the concert began and thousands of fans filled the stadium, James found himself standing near a security barrier, watching the distant stage where Michael was performing. James could barely see, could barely hear, but he could feel the energy. He watched Michael move, and even from hundreds of feet away, he could see his teachings in every gesture. Then something inside James broke. A desperate need to be seen, to be remembered, to matter. Before he even realized what he was doing, James was climbing over the security barrier and running toward the stage. His legs, one still damaged from that accident 34 years earlier, barely carried him. He stumbled twice, but kept going, driven by something he couldn't name. Security guards were shouting, running after him, but James didn't stop. He reached the stage and somehow, with strength he didn't know he had, pulled himself up onto it. Michael was in the middle of Billie Jean, performing for 65,000 screaming fans, when this elderly black man appeared on stage, limping toward him. Security was seconds away from tackling James when Michael stopped singing and screamed, "Stop! Don't touch him!" The stadium fell into shocked silence. Michael dropped his microphone, and his face showed an expression nobody in the audience had ever seen before. Recognition, disbelief, joy, and overwhelming emotion all at once. Michael ran toward James and threw his arms around him. "Mr. Crawford?" Michael said, his voice breaking. "Is it really you?" James, exhausted from his desperate run, could barely speak. "Michael," he whispered, "I just wanted to see you perform one more time. I wanted to see what you became." Michael was crying openly now, holding James like he was the most precious thing in the world. 65,000 people watched in confused silence as Michael Jackson embraced this unknown old man on the Wembley Stadium stage. Michael turned to the audience, still holding James, and spoke into the headset microphone he was wearing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael said, his voice thick with tears, "this man is James Earl Crawford. 23 years ago, when I was 7 years old and nobody knew my name, this man taught me how to dance. Everything you've seen me do tonight, every move, every step, started in his garage in Gary, Indiana. He never asked for money. He never wanted recognition. He just believed in a kid who had nothing and taught him everything." The stadium erupted, but not with the usual screaming excitement. It was a different kind of applause. Respectful, emotional, recognizing that they were witnessing something profound. Michael helped James to a chair that crew members quickly brought onto the stage. James was shaking, overwhelmed, barely able to process what was happening. Michael knelt beside him, holding his hand. "Mr. Crawford, why didn't you ever reach out?" Michael asked gently. "Why didn't you tell me where you were? All these years, I wanted to thank you properly." James smiled weakly. "You didn't need to thank me, Michael. Watching you succeed was all the thanks I ever needed. I taught you because you deserved to be taught. Because you had a gift that the world needed to see. I never wanted anything else." Michael shook his head. "You gave me everything and asked for nothing. But you're here now, and I'm not letting you disappear again." Michael stood up and addressed the audience again. "We're going to do something special tonight. Mr. Crawford taught me my first choreography, a simple routine to a song called Shout. He taught it to me when I was 7 years old, and I haven't performed it since I was a kid. Mr. Crawford, if you'll tell me the moves, I'll do them. Let's show these people where it all started." What followed was one of the most remarkable moments in concert history. James Crawford, 63 years old, sick and frail, sitting in a chair on the Wembley Stadium stage, called out choreography while Michael Jackson performed it. The moves were simple compared to Michael's usual routines. Basic steps, spins, and gestures that would seem elementary in any other context. But watching Michael Jackson perform these foundational moves while his elderly teacher called them out, everyone in the stadium understood they were witnessing the origin story of greatness. The crowd didn't scream or go wild. They watched in respectful silence, recognizing the sacred nature of what was happening. A master showing the world who had taught him. A student honoring his teacher. A full-circle moment that transcended entertainment and became something closer to ceremony. When they finished the simple routine, Michael helped James stand, and the two of them bowed together to thunderous applause. Michael wrapped his arm around James's shoulders and spoke into his headset. "Everything I am, everything I've achieved, started with this man believing in a 7-year-old kid from Gary, Indiana. He saw potential where others saw poverty. He gave his time and knowledge, expecting nothing in return. Mr. Crawford, I never forgot you. I never forgot what you taught me. And I never forgot the promise I made to make you proud." James was crying now, unable to speak. Michael turned to his tour manager in the wings and gave instructions that would change everything. After the concert ended, Michael didn't go to his dressing room. He stayed with James Crawford backstage for over 3 hours, talking about the old days in Gary, about the garage lessons, about everything that had happened in the 23 years since they'd last seen each other. Michael learned that James was sick, struggling financially, living alone in a tiny apartment in South London. Before the night ended, Michael made arrangements that would transform James's life. He set James up in a comfortable apartment near Havenhurst in California, close to where Michael lived. He made sure James had full medical coverage and access to the best doctors. He gave James a financial security that meant he'd never have to worry about money again. But more importantly, Michael gave James something money couldn't buy: recognition, acknowledgement, the knowledge that he mattered. Michael hired James as a consultant on his next tour, paying him a generous salary to advise on choreography and to share stories about the early days with Michael's dancers. James couldn't dance anymore, but his knowledge and his eye for movement were still sharp. He became part of Michael's team, not as charity, but as a valued contributor. For the first time in decades, James felt like he mattered again, like his life had purpose beyond just surviving. James Earl Crawford lived for another 4 years after that night at Wembley Stadium. For years that were infinitely better than the previous 23. He got to see Michael perform many more times, always from the best seat in the house. He got to know Michael's children. He got to share his stories with a new generation of dancers. And most importantly, he got to know that his life's work hadn't been forgotten. That the 7-year-old boy he'd taught in a garage in Gary, Indiana, had grown into a man who honored his teachers and kept his promises. When James died in 1992, at age 67, Michael Jackson paid for everything. The funeral, the burial, everything. Michael delivered the eulogy himself, telling the packed church about the man who had taught him to dance, who had believed in him when he was just a poor kid with a dream, who had given everything expecting nothing in return. "Mr. Crawford taught me more than dance steps," Michael said through tears. "He taught me that true teachers give without expecting return. That believing in someone's potential is one of the greatest gifts you can give. That greatness is built on foundations laid by people whose names we might forget, but whose impact we carry forever." Michael established the James Earl Crawford Foundation for Arts Education in 1993, dedicated to providing free dance and music instruction to underprivileged children. The foundation's motto, taken from what James had told young Michael in 1967, is simple but profound. "I give you these gifts expecting nothing in return except that you share them with others." To date, the foundation has provided free arts education to over 50,000 children, many of whom have gone on to professional careers in entertainment. The story of James Earl Crawford and Michael Jackson became legendary in the dance community. It represented something fundamental about artistry and legacy. That behind every great performer are teachers who gave without expectation of recognition. That true mastery is built on foundations laid by people who will never be famous. That honoring your teachers is one of the most important responsibilities of success. Michael kept a photograph in his bedroom at Neverland Ranch from that night at Wembley Stadium. It showed Michael and James on stage together, Michael's arm around his old teacher's shoulders, both of them smiling. Underneath the photo, Michael had written, "You taught me to dance, but more importantly, you taught me to remember where I came from and to honor those who helped me get where I was going. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. I never forgot my promise." Dancers and choreographers who worked with Michael in his later years all knew the story of James Crawford. Michael told it often, using it to teach younger performers about respecting their roots and honoring their teachers. He would say, "I'm Michael Jackson because James Crawford saw potential in a 7-year-old boy and gave his time, his knowledge, and his belief without asking for anything. If I ever forget that, if I ever think my success is mine alone, I've lost everything that matters." The moment at Wembley Stadium when Michael stopped his concert to embrace James Crawford was captured on video and became one of the most viewed pieces of footage in Michael Jackson's career. Not because of spectacular choreography or amazing vocals, but because it showed something the public rarely saw: Michael's humanity, his gratitude, his loyalty to those who had helped him. It showed that beneath the fame and the spectacle was a man who remembered a garage in Gary, Indiana, and a teacher who had believed in him. James Crawford's daughter, who had been estranged from her father for years, reconnected with him after seeing news coverage of that night at Wembley. She got to spend his final 4 years with him, healing their relationship, hearing his stories, understanding his importance. She told an interviewer after James died, "My father never bragged about teaching Michael Jackson. He saw it as just something he did because he loved dance and wanted to share it. But Michael never forgot. When my father needed someone to see him, to remember him, Michael was there. That's the mark of true character. Today, dance students around the world know the story of James Earl Crawford and the garage in Gary, Indiana, where Michael Jackson learned his first moves. It's taught in dance schools as an example of how great artists are shaped by teachers who give selflessly. It's told as a reminder that behind every iconic performer is a network of people whose names we might not know, but whose contributions made everything possible. The story of that night at Wembley Stadium teaches us that recognition matters, that seeing people matters, that remembering who helped us matters. Michael Jackson could have had security remove James from the stage, could have treated him as an intruder, a disruption, a problem to be handled. Instead, Michael saw his teacher, remembered his debt, and stopped everything to honor the man who had given him his foundation. In doing so, Michael taught 65,000 people and millions more who heard the story that success isn't something we achieve alone. It's built on the gifts of teachers, mentors, and believers who see potential when potential is all someone has. James Earl Crawford died knowing that his life had mattered, that the moves he'd taught in a garage in Gary, Indiana, had traveled around the world, that the 7-year-old boy he believed in had grown into a man who honored his promises and remembered his teachers. And Michael Jackson kept dancing, every move carrying the echo of lessons learned decades earlier. Every performance a testament to a teacher who had asked for nothing and given everything. Subscribe now and share this story with someone who taught you something important. Tell us in the comments about a teacher or mentor who shaped your life but might not know their impact. Hit that notification bell for more untold stories about the moments when Michael Jackson proved that gratitude and recognition matter more than fame or success. Because sometimes the most important moment of a concert isn't the biggest dance number or the highest note. It's the moment when a student sees his teacher after 23 years and stops everything to say thank you. You taught me everything, and I never forgot. Thank you, James Earl Crawford, for seeing potential in a 7-year-old boy and giving your gifts expecting nothing. And thank you, Michael Jackson, for never forgetting where greatness truly begins. In garages and basements and small rooms where teachers give their knowledge to students who might change the world if only someone believes in them first.